Hello, welcome to SVGA, a video games podcast. My name is Hugo and I'm joined today by Alex Lotz, managing producer at Ziggurat Interactive. Hello, Alex. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Hugo. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for rejoining us, I should say, because our listeners will maybe remember that we had you on the show 2 years ago in 2024 to talk about the launch of Killington Remastered. Today, we're obviously glad to have you back. Uh, of course, the company, also Ziggurat Interactive, has been busy preserving games and updating them for the modern age. And so we're talking again today because Ziggurat recently announced, in collaboration with I think, company called Reboxy, on one hand, some physical editions for Krush Kill N Destroy. That's a killer name, a real-time strategy series from the end of the 90s. And on your hand, there's also a bunch of quality of life updates, including, I think, better mod support and a modern multiplayer option. So it's a lot of stuff. How complicated was it to work on the KKNT franchise?
Well, this franchise is pretty beloved around the world, actually, particularly like Germany, Southeast Asia. The original development team and release was out of Australia, but it's kind of had a global audience for quite some time, kind of from like that golden age of real-time strategy. Maybe not as widely known as, Command and Conquer series and some of the other games, but it's definitely got its adherents, and many of them have stuck with the game for quite some time. So ever since Ziggurat kind of acquired the rights and brought them to Steam, we've saw like very consistent, um, not just people interested in buying the game, but like it's one of our most played games on
Oh, wow.
Steam. Like
Okay.
over time, people will continue to play it, and that was without the multiplayer support really being modernized. So the network code was there in the game that you could boot up on Steam, but it wouldn't natively work with modern online play
Yeah.
through something like Steam Play. So there were already modders who had been trying different ways to improve the game or improve the game's compatibility with modern systems and even workarounds to get multiplayer working. And one of them had reached out to us directly saying like, hey, I want to like help you guys improve support of the game. And over time, we established a good relationship with them and another developer that they brought on. Um, and it's been working. So basically, what we did recently was we started with a closed beta on KKND2, and then that became an open beta for allowing different people to try out. We started it as a beta because we wanted like very direct feedback from people
Yeah.
on what the system specs they were using and where they were located, what kind of internet connection they have, and just seeing what kind of things might affect the experience. But once we felt like it was looking good, it went into open beta, and now both KKND2 and KKND Extreme are in open beta with multiplayer that works quote unquote out of the box with modern clients like Steam. We are in the process of bringing it to GOG.
Mhm.
And once it's there on GOG, that will be the DRM free version,
Yeah.
which will go on the disc in the Reboxy release. So we kind of rolled out the physicals for Reboxy over time as well. So the first physical that they came out with, they call the Display Edition, which is like the box, and then there's digital codes you can redeem inside. But the Classic Edition is going to have more content, and it will have a CD-ROM inside with the DRM-free installer, so that you have the game forever, which is a topic I know we can talk more about. But yeah, it was basically um, the main challenges were not exactly solved for us, but it was like somebody kind of came to us
Yeah.
saying, I want to work on these specific problems. And we went back and forth with them a bit on just like what our priorities were in terms of improving the user experience and improving access to the older localized versions and um, the kind of features we want. So that's what I can say about it for now.
That's right. So yeah, but because obviously, if we go back to the multiplayer aspect, at the time, which is now around 30 years ago, um, we used to play mostly through online services, and they're all long dead, obviously. Uh, so yeah, I'm sure that adapting this kind of game, this some sort of a code this old to to play, as you said, through Steam was even if the basis was there, I'm guessing it needed some work, obviously. So that's one of the part of the work that you did at Ziggurat. Would you call this, because there's a lot of terms flying around when we talk about old games, would you call this a remaster, a remake, an updated edition?
Yeah, I suppose I'd just call it a modernization or like the term we ended up using was major update because we didn't want to make it so that if you already owned the game, you had to buy something new
Yeah, yeah.
in order to get these updates. But we did see, the amount of costs that went in development. We wanted to be able to recoup those costs for people buying the game for the first time. So like we did increase the price because the value of the product and like what comes with it with your purchase increased by quite a bit. Um, yeah, I guess we considered it a major update, and the two games, it's sort of a different style of update when you get down to like the code of it because yeah, like you said, there were older services like GameSpy or other kind of ways to play games online
Yeah.
in the late 90s and early 2000s. Um, but some of the games, like Cake Candy Extreme in particular, the first game in the series, or the updated version of the first game in the series, uh, it was more often played on local area networks. So
Mm.
there was a way to play over the internet that came with the game. But most of the people who have memories of playing it multiplayer, it would have been at a LAN party or with, locally networked systems. And so the code in the game that like updates the game state and like passes the messages back and forth between the players, it's expecting those updates very quickly, even by modern standards, because a local network is always going to be much faster than over the internet.
Yeah.
So when we kind of like translated it into modern systems, there were times when the game would stop and just wait. It was like I'm waiting for the packets to arrive, and then the game state would advance. So we had to literally retrofit more modern style of net play onto a game that was not meant to do that because it was expecting a faster connection, which you would, which is kind of funny. Like normally the problem is you try to bring an old game onto new hardware. The new hardware is too fast
Yeah.
for the old game, and in this case, uh, the old style of local area network play was expecting a faster connection than what was happening on an internet connection. So that was one of the few times I've experienced that where it's like, oh, the connection is not fast enough for this old game.
That's really funny because, as you said, obviously, usually it's the other way around. You have to slow everything. You have to slow everything down because uh, they sometimes tied to the speed of the CPU and some stuff like that. So, or they're gonna see, oh, there's too much memory. So I don't understand what's going on, and so the installer is crashing. So yeah, it's quite interesting. Obviously, Ziggurat has been doing this for a long time, taking older games and adapting them to the modern age. Let's call it like that. How do you choose which games to work on? Because you mentioned it, KKND, the series has been quite successful. You mentioned Asia, you mentioned Europe, I think, Germany, and we when we talked about Killing Time, obviously Killing Time had quite a success at the time. Sorry for repeating myself, uh, but when it comes to, let's say you have a meeting, you say, "Oh, what's our next project gonna be?" Do you try to look at sales numbers? How does it work?
I mean, I would say there is always a business case in terms of like what's the downside, what's the upside, and like um, some of my favorite genres, for example, they don't always move that many units of volume overall, and so it's like, well, yeah, we have this amazing FMV adventure game, but sometimes there's just not as many people who are like, well, why am I going to pay $10 for this game? Where it's like, once I played it once, that's it. Like, what retail value is there for an FMV? Or people have different thoughts about it, but by the same token, like we have seen genres that seemed like they ended and then they came back, right? Where it was like after Grim Fandango, people were like, oh, that's it for point and click adventure games. Like nobody's going to make a big budget point and click adventure. But then Kickstarter made it possible for some of those same people to make point and click adventure games again. And now you have like Daedalic making tons of them. And the genre, I think, continues to thrive. And back when I was, in the early 2000s and 2010s, people were kind of saying like, oh, I miss point and click adventure games. Nobody's ever going to make that game again. So in terms of selection, yeah, it helps if there's recognition. For us, it's like it helps that people want to talk about it. So there has to kind of be an interesting story there in some respect. But sometimes the interesting story is something like, well, this game didn't get that much attention at the time, but maybe it was ahead of its time. Like it's doing things on the design level that a bunch of modern games kind of figured out later. Like, oh, wait, this is a good way to approach this problem. Like we have this wrestling game called Bop and Wrestle that is made by the team that became Beam Software, strangely enough. Like they went on to make AK&D, but it was a game for kind of the Commodore 64 era when there was like 6 different home PCs that you could choose from. And so it was kind of ported to all of them. And it's fun seeing the difference between like the Spectrum version and the C64 version and all that kind of stuff. But it's like a full-on wrestling game with grappling attacks, striking attacks. You can run, you can move, you can climb up on the turnbuckle. So it feels like a modern wrestling game, but it's a 1-button joystick. So like I remember playing wrestling games on the N64 that basically had these same inputs mapped across like 12 buttons.
Yeah.
And I'm like, they figured out a control scheme to have the same interactions on a single button. So yeah, sometimes it's like we bring back something not because it's so beloved or so well remembered, but because we think it's an important piece of gaming history, or we think people will find it interesting from a design standpoint or from an aesthetic standpoint. And it's like, yeah, some things didn't click with people at the time, but sometimes they age better because it was like those designers stuck with their vision, and maybe it doesn't resonate as much at the time as it resonates now. But I don't know. A lot of it does come down to like you have developers that you need to work with on certain technical issues, and there's only so many hours they have in the day. And so, yeah, a lot of the hard decisions, it's like you have a list and you have to figure out which of the lists gets done first with the time available. I mean, I will say like a lot of the partners that we work with, they're often making strides on like how much they can accomplish in a given amount of time because the technology is always improving. And you have people will come out of the woodwork and approach us and like, oh, I have this new proprietary solution to either emulate or recompile or reproduce this hardware this time. And obviously like the emulation community and the open source community is solving those problems year after year. And we're in an interesting moment now where very good engineers who are trying to solve some of these problems are like, oh, I know how I would approach that, but there's not enough hours in the day for me to write all of that code.
Yeah.
They can have Claude Code do the beginning of it, or they can have Codex or whatever other tool they prefer do the beginning of it. And there's a lot of problems that can come out of using AI tools to generate code or to generate content. So it is kind of like an accelerator for both the good and the bad, I guess you could say. It's a bigger conversation, but the outcome is like the people who maybe aren't taking the right approach or who are taking an approach where the final product's going to be buggy or the final product's not going to run the way that you remember it. Those people can do the work faster, but the people who know what they're doing, the people who know how to make it feel right, and people who know how to make the improvements well, they can do the work faster with these tools as well. So I do get the sense that there's a lot of people. It seems to me that there's less backlash on using AI for coding than there is for AI generating art and generating I don't know what you'd say, like design decisions or design document, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I think people have less of a problem with like, well, I used AI to debug this code, or I used AI to improve the compatibility, or I used AI to recompile this game. And it's like, instead of having to use an emulator, I can natively run this Nintendo 64 game as an application on my Windows machine. And it's basically like a lot of the engineers I talk to, it's like, well, I could have spent 3 weeks doing that or 3 days. and the tool literally made that much of a difference. It's not as simple as like you just point the tool and it does everything, but if you know what you're doing, you don't have to learn a 10,000 line code base. Like you can
Mhm.
just like the AI tool and like have it analyze the code base for you and like find the dependencies that you're looking for. So anyway, it's a weird and controversial and constantly evolving topic, but I will say don't be surprised if you see an acceleration of preservation projects or an acceleration of people that have back catalogs where they're like, I couldn't bring this to market because the economics never made sense for me to pay an engineer to spend this much time getting it to work. But now if like the engineer only has to spend a fraction of that time getting it to work, suddenly like some of these projects are going to become more viable. So that's kind of my in progress discussion of watching where I think things seem to be moving. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not passing judgment on like which are the right tools to use and like is there any ethical use of AI is like an ongoing question in my opinion. So I'm not saying it's going to be the right or the best way to do it all the time. And like we've already seen like that Grand Theft Auto 3 remaster that made super heavy use of AI and everybody was really unhappy with how it looked and how it came out and how it played. Um, so there's dangers of it, but I also do think it could serve as an accelerator for better or worse.
Speaking of acceleration, I mean, I think we can already say that the uh, ret- not necessarily the retro gaming market in general, but the, let's call it the remaster slash remake market is already quite crowded.
Mhm.
There's obviously you, there's obviously Night Dive, which are, I don't know when they sleep, but they're pumping out games like there's no tomorrow. On a tangent note, Ubisoft just remastered Assassin's Creed 4. And so there's this movement that is already happening in the industry. You just talked about accelerating that process with AI to help with the code and so on. Do you feel that the market is already a bit crowded, or do you see some uh, growth potential?
I definitely see it growing, and um, I think Ziggurat is sort of in a better position to do what it does now than maybe it was when I started there 6 years ago. And kind of what I mean by that is like the number of, let me put this. So the analogy I've been kind of using is sometimes I'll go onto YouTube and I want to like find a music playlist to put in the background while I'm listening to work.
Hmm.
And it's like, yeah, maybe I want to listen to some electronic music. But if I just put in electronic music playlist, if the video was uploaded anytime after 2024, there's a good chance it's just going to be AI generated music that doesn't sound very good once you listen to it closely.
Yeah.
So I do think there's going to like I have already myself have been like show me only videos from before 2015, right? And I'm like, "Oh, I bet there's people doing that when they're looking for games right now where it's like there's games that will look good on the surface, but then the further you dig into them, the more you're like, "Oh, the quality is not really there."
Yeah.
But there's a craftsmanship to older games, especially the ones that have stood the test of time, and there's a care and there's a passion put into the work that you're like, at least for me personally, it's like, yeah, I'd rather play like a well-crafted, honed experience that's, even if it is only a 4 or 5 hour game, especially like I don't personally have I love fighting games and I love competitive games and everything, but I know I don't have the time to practice and compete
Mhm.
at a certain level. So it's like, yeah, I'm not going to put dozens of hours into that kind of game. So I don't know. I guess I would say the games market itself has increased, but I think the market for people who are just like, I want a finely crafted, finely honed experience. Sometimes it's easier to find that in an older game that has stood the test of time as opposed to just in like whatever the newest release is. So I think we may see more people seeking out older games, but importantly on more platforms,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like there are people who will buy their favorite game on Steam as well as Switch so they can have a handheld experience. Now we have Steam Deck, but not everybody has a Steam Deck and Steam Decks become very expensive. Um, and then, yeah, when you see like PlayStation doing away with physical discs starting in 2028, then people also have this question of like, oh, wait a minute, like I better get a copy of my favorite game in a way that's going to stand the test of time,
Mhm.
whether that's like DRM free on GOG or whether that is like a physical edition through Reboxy, right? So yeah, I mean, even some of the games that we've had on some platforms, we may bring it to others because it's yeah, you got to find and meet people where they want to play. So yeah, I guess it's like I think the market continues to grow and continues to get more crowded. I guess both of those things are true. Um, but I sort of feel like curation is what's really going to matter at this point because the storefronts are very accessible. Like anybody that's got $100 can upload a game to Steam, right?
Yeah.
So, what mechanisms do you use to find the games that you want to play? What sources do you trust? Do you find it like through recommendations on Instagram, or do you find it on TikTok, or do you find it on like websites or journalism? Like, um, so yeah, I guess the competition is like not just like how much quality product do you have left to put out, but what value adds can you do? What can you do to improve the experience? And how do you help people find the game
Mhm.
that will actually appeal to them, right? And I definitely do enjoy seeing situations and like stories of people like, well, I never even thought about trying this genre, but once I tried it out, I was like, wow, where did this come from? What was this idea? Like my personal story as a kid, but it's like still kind of funny to me was like the first time I played like a Pokemon game, I think it might have been my first direct experience of like turn-based combat, right?
Mhm.
So I was just like, "Oh, this is such a cool, like, system. I really enjoy, like, the taking turns." And then, like, I found Final Fantasy, and I was like, "Oh, this has been going on for a while." Okay. I think those experiences are always available too, right? Of just like, yeah, you like this point and click adventure game that came out 2 years ago. Well, like, check out Sanitarium or check out, some of the ones that we published, right? And, like, you might be surprised at, like, how much innovation was already going on here, back then. But yeah, fortunately, it's like I always feel like people don't talk about retro books or retro movies or retro
Mhm.
music. It's just like if a book is from 200 years ago is good, it's still good. If a album from 50 years ago is good, it's still good and it's still worth like seeking out and engaging with and listening to or experiencing on its own terms. And games are much more hardware bound, but there's more solutions becoming available all the time to allow the same game to be experienced on other hardware. It may not be the exact same experience as playing it on a CRT, that's at the intended resolution and all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff, um, but the game itself can still be enjoyed and stands the test of time for a reason.
And do you feel that with the rise of the prices for the hardware on the PC market? I mean, I've been looking at the price just for the graphics card are completely insane if you want to buy the high-end stuff. And so for about a year now, I'm just crossing my finger that my computer, nothing breaks in my computer because I cannot afford to replace any of the parts that are in there right now. So do you think that with these prices, and I was reading, I think yesterday or today, that the entire capacity of for that data storage and memory has been bought basically for data centers and AI and stuff. So do you think that seeing this and seeing that you cannot necessarily buy the latest hardware to play the latest game, do you think that do you think that gamers are going to turn around and say, "Oh, uh, this game is older, yes, can still be a lot of fun, and it's going to cost us $10, and it can play basically on a toaster." So, are you hopeful that in this weird situation that we are in right now, there's a positive side for you?
Yeah, I mean, looking at like the global market, there's always like people. Yeah, it's hard to speak broadly because there's so many different types of gamers. I guess you could say
Yeah.
where it's like there's tons of gamers who it's like they only buy one or two $60 games in a year. But then there's other people who are just like has 700 games in their Steam wish lists, and maybe they buy 50 games in a year, but they're all 80% off when they purchase them.
Mhm.
So it's like people are sensitive to different price points, and then there's regional pricing, which looks very different on Steam than it does on a lot of other platforms. But yeah, I think also I'm seeing more indie games and more smaller releases that are like, this is a $5 game, but it's extremely well crafted and it's a short experience and it's only $5 because it's like, yeah, on certain metrics, I can't compete with a $20 game, but I see some of these $5 games and the reviews, it's like I've put 300 hours into this, right?
Mm.
And it's like if you craft the game correctly, like that's very possible. So yeah, it depends on what you're looking for, I guess you could say. And like, it, a game like Expedition 33, it's like people like it has to justify charging the price point that it does, but it also did not charge the 60 or $70. Like it definitely positioned itself as like a
Yeah.
super indie, but like by the standards of a lot of games I work on, like it's way bigger budget and way bigger production value, and it's not a small team, and they have quite a bit of outsourcing, all that kind of stuff, and like, but I think what matters and like what makes them better than a lot of other double A games is like the craftsmanship and the heart and the story and like
Mhm.
taking the time to get all these things right. And I don't know. I also think like, yeah, I don't know. The fidelity conversation is something else. Let me refocus and get back to the question you actually asked. I know I'm kind of going on a lot of tangents.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
So I would say, yes, we are seeing people who are just like looking for something new and interesting to enjoy, and new can mean new to them as opposed to like an actually new game. And if you're like, well, this is a retro game that has stood the test of time and I can buy it at a much lower price point than a new game, which a lot of gamers don't even want to buy stuff day one because they're like, well, I know it's going to get patched
Yeah.
4 times in the next month, so like, why don't I wait for the patch and why don't I wait for the discount, that kind of thing. So there's all different calculations that go into the consumer mindset, but yeah, I do think broadly with this strain on the economy and like the increasing price of everything because of like supply chains and uh but yeah, hardware in particular, I think it's a tough time if you're somebody who is into like optimizing and upgrading your personal computer. I do think, yeah, it seems like on the economic side, it's going to be a lot harder for people whose the core of their business was hardware, or hardware is an important part of their business. Like, I don't know how they're going to justify it with RAM prices in particular going in the direction that they seem to continue to be going in. Um, I don't know. I mean, there's some people who speculate that the data center investments will have to dry up at some point, or will have to like slow down at some point, and maybe the price of some of the hardware will suddenly drop. But I have trouble believing they're going to drop to what they were
Mhm.
before. But yeah, to answer it a little more succinctly, I would say yes, it's harder for people to justify purchasing new hardware at this point. So they may be looking at games that they know can run on all their hardware. And yeah, there's plenty of other gamers I know who have a good gaming PC, but they still want to be able to play something on their Steam Deck, and they still want to be able to play something on like their older retro devices. And so
Mhm.
they'll look at games that have those lower system requirements.
And speaking of older games, do you have, if you circle back to KKND, do you have a number in mind that, oh, we want to sell? I mean, the game is already out there. The game's already available on Steam. Obviously, it has been for a while. But with the announcement of the box edition, like, for example, do you have a number of copies in mind that you would wish to sell? Is it 50,000, 100,000, something else?
Um, it's a little weird to say in this case because it's been rolling out in kind of an unusual pattern of like closed beta and then open beta and then full release and then GOG and then Reboxy. So I think we're experimenting in this case where it's like one of our IPs that has a higher organic attach rate compared to a lot of our other ones. And so we're seeing like, does that audience, um, which things excite them the most in terms of like online multiplayer, patching the game, which has not been patched in a long time because there's a lot of quality of life and bug fixes that are happening as well. And then making physical goods available. So, um, yeah, obviously we want to be able to cover the costs of development and then beyond that. Uh, but a lot of this is very like long tail. I guess with games that have been out as long as this one's been out, I think it's like if we can increase like the average number of people that tend to make the purchase during promotions or on just like a month to month basis, I think that's what matters a lot for like our back catalog titles. But if it were a new release, then yeah, the unit economics would look a little bit different. But I don't know. It's harder for me to put a number on it right now because it's such a multifaceted project in my head that we've actually been working with the developer on for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I understand.
um, yeah,
Alex Lotz, managing producer at Ziggurat Interactive. Thank you very much for being with us today.
yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm. My apologies to the editor. I know I went in a lot of different directions, but hopefully enough of it will be usable.
It's quite interesting. I mean, it's always nice to have, let's call it a peek behind the curtain,
Yeah,
because we're on our side, we're just buying games and playing them. But when we can learn more about the production process and the development process and so on, the economics that comes into play, it's always super interesting to us. So thank you again. And thank you, of course, to our listeners. You can find all of previous SVGA episodes on Pieuvre. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Until next time.